Ever get that feeling that our economy is like a rubber band stretched way too tight? You just know it's about to snap. Well, today we're going to ditch the usual spreadsheets and start looking at the economy like an engineer would, as a physical material under constant stress. And trust me, it's a perspective that might just change how you see everything.
So let's just dive right in with the big question, the one that probably keeps a few of us up at night. Why does it feel like our economy is always lurching from an exciting boom to a terrifying bust? It's like being on a roller coaster, you know? But the usual economic dashboards, they just don't seem to warn us before the really big drops.
And we've all been there, right? You feel the dizzying highs of an economic boom and then the gut punch of a bust. We see these speculative bubbles pop up in housing or tech stocks, and we just know they can't last. And these shocks, they don't just stay in the stock market. They ripple out into the real world, fueling inequality and a ton of political turmoil.
Okay, so here's the big idea for today. What if we just stop looking at the economy like it's some abstract spreadsheet and started looking at it like an engineer would? Think of it like a physical material, a piece of steel maybe, or a plank of wood. Something that can be stretched, compressed, and if you push it too far, can actually break. This one simple shift in perspective gives us a whole new language to understand what's really going on.
So first up, let's talk about something called market stress. This is basically any force, whether it's internal or external, that puts pressure on the system. Think about rising inflation squeezing your budget or a handful of giant companies cornering an entire industry. These aren't just numbers on a screen. They are real forces loading up the economic structure with a whole lot of tension.
Right. And just like a bridge creaking under a heavy load, when you apply all that stress to an economy, it starts to bend, it deforms. We call this market strain. This is what happens when the price of something, say a house or a share of stock, gets stretched way out of line with its actual fundamental value. And that value, it's based on real things, like the human labor, the skill, and the real-world usefulness of a thing. The bigger the gap, the more strain the system is under.
So if you don't want your economy to just snap under all that pressure, or worse, just float away in some crazy speculative bubble, you need an anchor. And that's where this idea of value anchoring comes in. It's whatever mechanism tethers prices back to the real world, to the actual hours of labor, the skill, the risk that went into creating something. It is the economy's tether to reality.
Now check this out, because this is where this framework gets really powerful. It shows us exactly why two completely opposite economic systems both end up failing. A pure, unregulated free market, it's like a balloon. Super elastic, sure, but it has a really weak anchor, so it just kind of floats away into these massive bubbles. On the other hand, a pure planned economy is like a block of concrete. It's anchored solid, but it has zero flexibility. It can't adapt to change. So under pressure, it just cracks and collapses.
So here's the bottom line, the real takeaway. One system fails because its sense of value just floats away from reality. The other one fails because its value is frozen solid, completely unable to adapt. Both systems end up building enormous, unsustainable strain. They just break in totally different ways. It really suggests that the best system has to find a balance between the two. So you might be asking, okay, is there a real-world example of this kind of balance? Well, the Scandinavian model is a fascinating case study. It totally uses the market's elasticity to figure out prices, but it has these incredibly strong anchors, things like powerful labor unions and really transparent wage negotiations that tie value back to work. And on top of all that, you have social safety nets that act like giant shock absorbers, damping any stress on the system. What you get is an economy that's both flexible and grounded in reality.
Okay, but what happens when these forces are applied between countries? Because, economies aren't just isolated islands. Geopolitical tools, things like sanctions and tariffs, they act as these massive external stress injectors. They're not just policies, they are weapons, really, designed to deliberately bend and distort the entire global economic system.
And you can actually see how these tools have evolved over time. During the World Wars, the stress was physical, right? Blockades and bombing to create real scarcity. Then, during the Cold War, it became technological, embargoes designed to create these big innovation gaps. And now, today, the stress is financial. We have these networked sanctions that force entire global supply chains to twist and contort, finding these really expensive workarounds. The method changes, but the goal is always the same: inject stress.
So, let's take tariffs. Looking through this lens, a tariff isn't just a tax, it's a deliberate injection of artificial stress into the system. It makes imported goods more expensive, yeah, but not because those goods are suddenly more valuable or took more effort to make.
It's just an extra layer of cost, an artificial pressure. And that stress? Well, it's ultimately absorbed by businesses and, you guessed it, us, the consumers.
Now, sanctions are an even more powerful stressor. They don't just put up a roadblock between point A and point B, they force the entire global traffic system to find new, much less efficient paths. This creates what the source material calls rerouted strain. You see the emergence of shadow fleets of oil tankers, secretive middlemen, huge price markups. It distorts the whole market for everyone, not just the country being sanctioned.
And finally, we have war. War is the ultimate stressor. It is an event that is actively, physically destroying real productive capacity. We're talking factories, infrastructure, and human lives. And yet, here's the paradox. The spending that goes along with war often gets counted as a positive for GDP growth. This framework, though, it cuts right through that illusion and correctly identifies war for what it truly is, an engine of negative value production.
So, at the end of the day, this whole framework reframes the entire debate. It suggests that the most important question we should be asking isn't about left versus right or markets versus planning. The real question is our economy resilient? Can our system absorb stress without either drifting off into fantasyland or freezing up into total failure? That right there is the true test of a healthy economy.
And so that leaves us with one final thought to chew on. If you start looking at the world through this lens of stress, strain, and value, where do you see the pressure building today? What parts of our economy are being stretched to their absolute breaking point? It's a really powerful new way to see the world, and honestly, once you start looking for the cracks, it's pretty hard to stop.